We bring in David Kennedy, former hacker for the National Security Agency and the Marine Corps, now CEO of cybersecurity firm TrustedSec. David, nice to see you. We appreciate it. Without Bitcoin, does ransomware attacks work?
It's hard to say because ransomware really spawned when cryptocurrencies started to become a major thing, right? And the whole challenge with a lot of these groups is how do you get money from a profiteering perspective to these organizations? And money laundering has always been the biggest pro for the FBI to go after these organizations, figure how they're working their operations, who's in charge. And with Bitcoin, you have a major problem with that because it's very difficult to unmask individuals and those types of things. So it has definitely made it a lot easier for these groups to operate by. Would they have, resorted to other methods like wire transfers to, international, locations? We've seen business email compromises, for example, which, are compromising financial industries going through China, other locations. So it's still possible. You've mentioned a lot of things.
I just want to break this down as simply as we possibly can. What makes Bitcoin so much harder to trace than, say, a wire transfer or any other financial transaction, like, as you pointed out, the FBI is so good at?
Yeah, it's how these wallets work and who owns the wallets and how do you transfer money back and forth between those. It's a decentralized system, which essentially means that it's very difficult to see where the money's going in and where the money's going out, which is typically what you would use to identify anomalies in money and things to that effect. So, it's a digital currency. It's one that, is basically all online. It's literally a bunch of bits and, ones and zeros. Moving back and forth, and that thus makes it very difficult for law enforcement to really get a hold of it. It's not impossible, but still very difficult.
We just put up a graphic here. A couple of our producers are big fans of Bitcoin. It's a 302% price increase in 1 year. Has the rise of value of Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies affected these ransomware attacks?
Oh, it's huge. When you start looking at some of these early groups on Bitcoins, they demand, 100 Bitcoin, which might, be equivalent to, $50,000. Now we're seeing these ransoms, hit 5 million, 10 million, 40 million dollars in conversion to Bitcoin. So the ransoms have definitely gotten larger. But also, the one thing to point out is that since the money has also increased with these groups, their sophistication levels of these ransomware groups have also increased as well. They've hired better hackers because they can pay more money for salaries, for these individuals to develop better weapons and tools to go after these organizers. And then they get very good at what they do.
Yeah, no kidding. They're very good at what they do. The other people who are pretty good at what they do is the NSA. And I won't make you say it, but I'll say it, that there was this thing called Stuxnet, probably you never heard of it, that may have destroyed a bunch of centrifuges in Iran. That was some pretty sophisticated hacking. It seems as though the United States has a number of these capabilities. Why not hack back? Why not shut down a pipeline in Russia and tell the Russians, look, you keep coming after us, we're going to start coming after you guys. It's going to get very uncomfortable.
We definitely need a policy change to put pressure onto these countries. The top 5 ransomware groups out of Russia, yielding hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars per year off of organizations and crippling companies here in the United States and its allies. And there's no question we have the capabilities to launch offensives. The problem is that the NSA has typically been used for intelligence gathering purposes and operations around intelligence gathering, whereas you look at Russia and China, the FSB, for example, or the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, they work on behest of the government, the communist, type country with China, and obviously Putin from a Kremlin perspective, and they have very different operating procedures. Whereas they are, if they're tasked to do something, they go and do it. Whereas we have laws and regulations here that make it very difficult. We have to change that.
Well, and conceivably also, it helps Putin's ends. To have the kind of difficulties in the United States that these hacking attacks against infrastructure and critical infrastructure that it's not necessarily government owned. It's a little bit different because in Russia, effectively everything is government owned or owned by the oligarchs that answer to the government. You talked about a change in policy. I'd like you to listen to Jen Psaki from today, and then we'll see what you think about the current policy. Take a listen.
We do expect this to be one of the issues that the president will discuss with President Putin at the summit. We're not taking any options off the table in terms of how we may respond, but of course there's an internal policy review process to consider that. We're in direct touch with the Russians as well to convey our concerns about these reports.
You've studied the other side and the adversaries that we're up against. They listen to that. What do they really hear?
Nothing at this point in time. Right now there's discussions that they may label ransomware groups as more of terrorist organizations, which we still don't know what that means. Does that mean that it's illegal to make payments to them, which would shut down the money going into them, but also heavily impact corporations in the United States? There's a lot up in the air right now, but we really haven't seen anything substantial yet to make a determination. There's nothing that really has changed to curb Russia's desire to go after this. I mean, here's the thing. We've never seen ransomware groups go after critical infrastructure as much as we have in the past few months here. And it's very peculiar that it's happening right around the time of an administration change. I would have to bet that nothing goes on in Kremlin without Vladimir Putin knowing about it and those operations being approved. That's obviously speculation. We have no intelligence confirming that. But we're seeing a lot of things happen right now where the cyber warfare type of front is shifting. China's been much more aggressive. Russia's been much more aggressive. This is a very different ballgame right now in the cyber warfare field that, is frankly kind of scary looking into the future.
I just wanted to drill down on that for a second, because we've been led to believe that these are cyber criminals, quote unquote. These are ransomware attacks. Is this really cyber war? Is this a proxy war, or what the Russians would call a hybrid war, by the Kremlin using these proxies? And if they happen to pick up a couple of $1 million along the way, it's worth disrupting American infrastructure and American way of life?
There's no question that these organizations work with impunity from the Russian government. There's no question about that, right? Because we know who these individuals are. One of the largest ransomware group folks, drives a Bugatti and Maserati, had a $5 million wedding. We know exactly who he is and operates out of Russia in and out. Runs a complete organized crime business here, targeting, hospitals, shutting down hospitals and medical facilities. They're one of the most ruthless groups out there. This happens on behest of the Russian government. Now, again, the clear delineation is that we have always treated ransomware completely different than we treat nation state attacks. And that really has to change. We have to treat ransomware attacks, if they're happening within the country and the country is providing sanctions for these specific groups, to treat it as a nation state attack. Yeah. And that's really the policy shift that has to come through in the United States and our allies.
It's almost like what George W. Bush once said, which is we're no longer going to make a distinction between the terrorists and the nations that harbor the terrorists, is sort of what you're talking about. David, really appreciate your time. Former NSA hacker, currently CEO of security firm Trusted Sec, and discreet at times as well. We appreciate your time, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.